My new boss fired me 11 days before my $87,000 retirement bonus kicked in after 27 years. Huge mistake since I helped write the employee handbook that made his termination illegal. Welcome to Revenge Galore. If you love real-gripping stories, where justice hits hard and betrayal never goes unpunished, this channel is your new favorite place. Please subscribe. My name is Philip Combs, and at 61 years old I thought I understood how the world worked. 27 years at Garrison Industrial Supplies had taught me that loyalty, hard work, and institutional knowledge were valuable assets. What I learned in a sterile conference room on a rainy Tuesday morning was that to some people, experience is just expensive dead weight waiting to be discarded. The irony is almost perfect. The man who tried to cheat me out of my retirement had no idea that I helped create the very policies that would destroy him. I started at Garrison Industrial in 1997, when the company was still run by founder Harold Garrison from a cramped office that smelled like motor oil and determination. Fresh out of a 20-year Navy career, I needed steady work with good benefits. My wife Susan was battling lupus and our medical bills were mounting. What began as a temporary warehouse position turned into nearly 3 decades of building something I genuinely believed in. Garrison Industrial manufactured and distributed heavy machinery parts for construction and mining operations across the Southeast. When I arrived, we had 12 employees and served 3 states. By the time Harold's son Robert took over in 2015, we'd grown to 280 employees serving customers from Florida to Virginia. I'd been part of that growth every step of the way. I worked my way up from warehouse associate to shift supervisor to operations manager. In 2010, when Harold decided to formalize our employee policies and procedures, he asked me to lead the committee that would draft our first comprehensive employee handbook. We spent 8 months researching best practices, consulting with employment attorneys, and creating policies that would protect both the company and its workers. One policy I was particularly proud of was Section 4.2.3, the Retirement Benefit Protection Clause. We'd heard horror stories about companies firing longtime employees just before their pensions vested, and Harold was adamant that Garrison Industrial would never engage in such practices. The policy was clear. Any employee within 30 days of retirement eligibility could not be terminated without documented cause and approval from both the CEO and board of directors. That policy would become the foundation of my revenge. Robert Garrison was nothing like his father. Where Harold had been hands-on and personal, Robert was detached and corporate. He'd earned his MBA from Vanderbilt and spent 5 years at a consulting firm before reluctantly returning to run the family business. He wasn't bad, just different. He modernized our computer systems, streamlined operations, and grew revenue by 40% over his first 7 years. But in 2022, Robert decided he wanted out. The stress of running a manufacturing company during supply chain chaos and labor shortages had worn him down. When Jesco Capital Partners offered to buy Garrison Industrial for $75 million, Robert jumped at the chance. That's how I met Tristan Kellerman. Kellerman arrived in January 2024 with the title of Chief Executive Officer and a mandate to optimize operations for maximum efficiency and profitability. At 42, he had an MBA from Wharton, 10 years of experience at McKinsey & Company, and absolutely no understanding of our industry, our culture, or our people. Our first all-hands meeting should have been a warning. Kellerman stood at the front of our warehouse in a designer suit that probably cost more than most of our employees made in a month, explaining his vision for transforming Garrison Industrial into a lean, data-driven organization. Legacy thinking and outdated processes are holding us back, he announced to the 280 people who'd built this company from the ground up. We need to embrace change, eliminate inefficiencies, and make tough decisions about resource allocation. I was standing in the back with Dennis Hayworth, our quality control supervisor, and Elena Rodriguez, who ran our customer service department. All 3 of us had been with the company for over 20 years. We exchanged glances that said the same thing. This man had no idea what he was talking about. The changes started small. Kellerman eliminated our annual company picnic, citing unnecessary expenses. He ended the practice of Christmas bonuses, replacing them with performance-based incentives that somehow never materialized. He hired consultants to conduct efficiency audits that resulted in eliminating positions that had been filled by employees nearing retirement age. Then the targeted terminations began. In March, Dennis Hayworth was called into Kellerman's office and informed that his position was being eliminated due to operational restructuring. Dennis was 63 years old with 22 years of service. He was 6 weeks away from qualifying for his retirement bonus. In April, Elena Rodriguez received the same treatment. At 59, with 24 years of service, she was told that customer service was being consolidated and modernized. She was 3 weeks from retirement eligibility. By May, I'd counted 7 longtime employees who'd been terminated just before reaching retirement milestones. The pattern was obvious to anyone paying attention, but Kellerman was careful. Each termination was documented as performance-related or necessitated by restructuring. He had consultants' reports to justify every decision. What he didn't have was knowledge of the policies that were supposed to protect us. The meeting that ended my career at Garrison Industrial took place on Tuesday, June 18, 2024, at 3:30 p.m. in Conference Room B. Kellerman sat across from me with a manila folder and the kind of practiced expression that consultants learn for delivering bad news. "Philip," he began, "I appreciate the dedication you've shown to this company over the years. However, we're moving in a new direction that requires different skill sets and approaches to operations management." I said nothing. 27 years of experience had taught me when to listen and when to speak. "Your position is being eliminated as part of our operational restructuring," he continued. "We're offering a severance package that I think you'll find generous." He slid the folder across the table. Inside was a termination letter, a non-disclosure agreement, and a severance offer of 8 weeks' pay. For someone 11 days away from an $87,000 retirement bonus, it was an insult. "You have until Friday to accept these terms," Kellerman said. "Otherwise the offer is withdrawn." I looked at the man who thought he could steal nearly 3 decades of my life's work with a form letter and a deadline. Then I did something that clearly surprised him. I smiled. "Thank you for the opportunity, Tristan," I said, standing up and shaking his hand. "I'll give this the consideration it deserves." As I walked out of that conference room, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete clarity about what I needed to do. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with the termination paperwork spread in front of me. Susan had passed away 2 years earlier, so it was just me and our old tabby cat, Winston, who seemed to sense that something significant was happening. I pulled out the employee handbook I'd helped write 14 years earlier and turned to section 4.2.3. The language was clear and unambiguous. No employee within 30 days of retirement eligibility may be terminated without documented performance deficiencies and approval from both the Chief Executive Officer and Board of Directors. Kellerman had the CEO title, but had he consulted with the board? More importantly, did he even know this policy existed? I spent the next 2 hours reviewing every piece of documentation related to my termination. No performance reviews citing deficiencies. No progressive discipline. No board consultation. Kellerman had violated company policy in multiple ways, and he'd done it in writing. But I needed more than policy violations. If Kellerman was systematically targeting older employees, I needed proof of the pattern. Wednesday morning, I called my nephew David Combs, who practiced employment law in Asheville. David was Susan's sister's boy, a sharp attorney who'd built a successful practice representing workers in discrimination cases. "Uncle Phil," he said when I explained the situation, "what you're describing sounds like textbook age discrimination. If this guy has been doing it systematically, you might have a federal case. What do I need to prove that?" "Documentation. Patterns. Evidence that the decision-making was based on age rather than performance. Do you have access to personnel files or termination records?" I thought about my 27 years at Garrison Industrial, the relationships I'd built, the people who trusted me. "I might be able to get what you need. Give me everything you can by Friday. Don't do anything that could get you in legal trouble, but if there's public information or records you legitimately have access to, gather it all." Thursday was my last official day at Garrison Industrial. I spent the morning cleaning out my office and the afternoon saying goodbye to colleagues who'd become family over the years. As I packed my personal items, several people stopped by to express their outrage at my termination. "This is wrong, Mr. Combs," said Maria Santos, a warehouse associate I'd hired 8 years earlier. "Everybody knows you should get that bonus." "Sometimes things don't work out the way we plan, Maria," I replied. "But thank you for saying that." What I didn't mention was the USB drive in my pocket, loaded with every piece of documentation I could legally access. Personnel records I'd been copied on as operations manager. Termination letters I'd reviewed for operational impact. Email chains about restructuring that clearly showed a pattern of targeting older employees. Most importantly, I had a recording. 2 weeks earlier, Kellerman had called a management meeting to discuss workforce optimization. Thinking it was about improving efficiency, I'd brought my digital recorder to take notes, as I always did for important meetings. What I captured was Kellerman explaining his strategy in devastating detail. Look, we've got too many legacy employees consuming resources without contributing proportional value, Heath said. These people are expensive, resistant to change, and frankly, they're blocking us from bringing in younger talent who can adapt to our new direction. When Dennis Hayworth had asked about the retirement eligibility of some targeted employees, Kellerman's response was even more damning. That's exactly why we need to act quickly. Waiting until these people qualify for full benefits will cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars we can't afford to lose. The recording was 2 hours long, and it documented systematic age discrimination in Kellerman's own words. Friday morning, I drove to Asheville and spent 4 hours in David's office, reviewing every piece of evidence I'd gathered. By lunchtime, we had a case that extended far beyond my individual termination. Uncle Phil, David said, leaning back in his chair with an expression of amazement, this isn't just wrongful termination. This is systematic age discrimination affecting multiple employees. The EOC is going to be very interested in this recording. What happens now? Now we file complaints with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and prepare a federal lawsuit. This Kellerman guy just handed us a case that could result in punitive damages for every affected employee. How long will this take? Depends on how smart Kellerman's lawyers are. If they recognize the strength of our evidence, they'll want to settle quickly to avoid trial. If they try to fight it. David smiled grimly. Well, let's just say this recording alone could cost them millions in damages. Monday morning, I did something I'd never done in 27 years at Garrison Industrial. I called in sick. Instead of going to work, I drove to the EOC office in Charlotte and filed a formal complaint alleging systematic age discrimination. By Tuesday afternoon, Kellerman knew he had a problem. David called me at 3 p.m. with an update that made me smile for the first time in weeks. I just got off the phone with Garrison Industrial's general counsel. They want to meet to discuss a potential misunderstanding about your termination. What kind of misunderstanding? The kind that happens when a CEO violates federal law and company policy while documenting his discrimination on a recording device. The meeting took place Thursday morning in a conference room at David's law firm. Kellerman arrived with 2 attorneys and the expression of someone who just realized he'd made a catastrophic mistake. Mr. Combs, said the lead attorney, a woman named Patricia Vance, we believe there may have been some confusion about the circumstances of your termination. My client is prepared to discuss a resolution that would be satisfactory to all parties. David leaned forward slightly. Ms. Vance, my client's termination violated both federal age discrimination law and company policy that he helped write. We're not looking for a resolution. We're looking for justice. What would justice look like in this case? She asked. Full retirement benefits for Mr. Combs and every other employee who was wrongfully terminated, David replied. Punitive damages for the systematic discrimination. Policy changes to prevent future violations. And frankly, accountability for the person who created this situation. Kellerman spoke for the first time. Mr. Combs, I hope you understand that these terminations were purely business decisions based on operational needs. I looked at the man who'd tried to steal my retirement and smiled. Tristan, I have 2 hours of recordings where you explain exactly why you targeted older employees. Would you like me to play them for your attorneys? The color drained from his face. Patricia Vance requested a private consultation with her client. When they returned an hour later, their approach had changed completely. Mr. Combs, she said, we're prepared to offer full restoration of your retirement benefits, plus additional compensation for the hardship this situation has caused. And the other employees? David asked. We'll need to review each case individually, but we're committed to making this right. And Mr. Kellerman's employment status? Another private consultation. Mr. Kellerman has decided to pursue other opportunities. I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for months. Kellerman was gone and justice was being served. Over the next 3 weeks, we negotiated a comprehensive settlement that exceeded even my optimistic expectations. I received my full $87,000 retirement bonus, plus interest, plus an additional $50,000 in compensatory damages. More importantly, Dennis Hayworth, Elena Rodriguez, and 5 other wrongfully terminated employees received similar settlements. The total cost to Garrison Industrial was $847,000 in direct payments, plus legal fees, plus the expense of implementing new policies to prevent future discrimination. As part of the settlement, the company agreed to establish the Philip Combs Fair Employment Protection Policy, which strengthened protections for employees approaching retirement and required board approval for any termination of workers over 50. The personal satisfaction of the financial settlement was meaningful, but the real vindication came from the industry recognition that followed. When word spread about our successful fight against age discrimination, I received calls from workers at other companies facing similar situations. David and I ended up helping file complaints that resulted in investigations at 3 other manufacturing companies. 6 months after that terrible meeting in Conference Room B, I was sitting on my back porch, reading a letter from the EOC informing me that their investigation of Garrison Industrial had been closed with a finding of systematic age discrimination. Kellerman's practices had been officially documented as violations of federal law. I'd also received a call from Robert Garrison, who'd heard about what happened under his successor. "Philip," he'd said, "I'm sorry this happened. That's not the company my father built, and it's not what we intended when we sold." "I know, Robert. Sometimes you don't realize what you've lost until it's gone." The best news came a month later, when I learned that Kellerman had been quietly pushed out of his next position when his new employer learned about the discrimination findings. His career in executive management was effectively over. As I finished reading the EOC letter, Winston jumped onto my lap, purring contentedly. The October air was crisp, and the leaves on Susan's oak tree were turning gold and red. For the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Uncle Phil just wanted you to know, we got the settlement for the Helena Industries case. $1.2 million for 15 wrongfully terminated employees. Your case is becoming a model for these lawsuits." I smiled and typed back, "Glad to help. Experience has its advantages." The next morning, I received a package in the mail from Dennis Hayworth. Inside was a photograph of him with his grandson, taken at a Little League game. On the back he'd written, "Thanks for fighting for all of us. Enjoying retirement because of you." That afternoon, I drove to Garrison Industrial one last time. Not to clean out a desk or turn in equipment, but to pick up a plaque that the employees had commissioned to commemorate our fight against discrimination. It read, "Philip Combs, 27 years of service, a man who stood up for what's right." I found myself walking through the warehouse one final time, remembering the young Navy veteran who'd started here in 1997, just looking for steady work and good benefits. He never imagined that his dedication to fair policies and worker protection would one day save his retirement and help dozens of other employees fight discrimination. As I walked past the conference room where Kellerman had tried to steal my future, I thought about the recording device that had captured his confession, the employee handbook that had protected my rights, and the network of relationships that had made justice possible. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought by the people you least suspect, using weapons the enemy never sees coming. Kellerman had underestimated a 61-year-old warehouse manager, assuming I was too old, too tired, or too defeated to fight back. He learned the hard way that experience is only worthless if you don't know how to use it. That evening, I called David to thank him for his help with the case. "Uncle Phil," he said, "I should be thanking you. That recording and documentation made this one of the strongest age discrimination cases I've ever handled." "I learned a long time ago to pay attention to details," I replied. 27 years of experience teaches you to expect the unexpected and document everything. "What's next for you?" I looked out at Susan's garden, thinking about the plans we'd made for retirement that illness had cut short. "I think I'm going to travel a bit. See some places Susan and I always talked about visiting. Maybe take that cross-country trip we never had time for." "You've earned it." "I have. And more importantly, I've made sure other people will have the same chance." As I hung up the phone, I reflected on the difference between justice and revenge. Revenge would have been personal, vindictive, focused on hurting Kellerman rather than protecting workers. Justice was systemic, protective, focused on preventing future victims rather than just punishing past wrongs. The Philip Combs Fair Employment Protection Policy would shield employees for years to come. The EEOC investigation had created precedents that would help other discrimination cases. The industry attention had made other executives think twice before targeting older workers. Most importantly, 7 wrongfully terminated employees had received their full retirement benefits and could move forward with dignity and financial security. On Sunday, I had dinner with my neighbors, the Patterson family, who'd become close friends since Susan's passing. Tom Patterson was 58 and worked at a textile company that had recently been acquired by a private equity firm. "Phil," he said over dessert, "I've been worried about some changes at my company. The new management seems to be pushing out older employees. After hearing about your situation, I'm wondering if I should be documenting things more carefully." "Always document everything, Tom," I advised. "And remember, experience is valuable. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Would you mind if I called your nephew if things get worse?" "David would be happy to help." That's what family is for. As I drove home that evening, I realized that the best revenge had been transforming my personal injustice into systemic change. Kellerman had tried to steal my retirement, but his actions had ultimately strengthened protections for countless other workers. The next morning, I received an email from Elena Rodriguez, who'd been terminated 3 weeks before her retirement eligibility. She was writing from Florida, where she was enjoying her settlement-funded retirement. "Philip," she wrote, "I wanted you to know that I start volunteering with the Senior Advocacy Center next week. They help older workers who face discrimination. I figure after what we went through, I should help others who might be in similar situations. Thank you for showing us that we didn't have to accept what happened to us." I typed back, "Elena, that's wonderful news. Susan always said that the best way to honor a blessing is to pass it forward. I'm proud of you for turning this experience into something positive." Later that day, I made a decision that felt right. I called the Senior Advocacy Center Elena had mentioned and volunteered to serve on their board of directors. If my experience could help other workers protect their rights, then Kellerman's discrimination would ultimately serve a positive purpose. The weekly board meetings became one of my favorite retirement activities. We reviewed cases, provided resources for workers facing discrimination, and lobbied for stronger employment protections. Within 6 months, we'd helped secure favorable settlements for 12 older workers and prevented several companies from implementing discriminatory policies. 1 year after my termination, I received a call that brought everything full circle. Robert Garrison was on the line, calling to offer me a consulting position with his new company. "Philip," he said, "I'm starting a manufacturing consulting firm that helps family businesses navigate ownership transitions. I need someone with your experience and integrity to help develop policies that protect both companies and employees." "That sounds interesting, Robert. What made you think of me?" "Honestly, watching how you handled the situation with Kellerman. You showed me what real leadership looks like. When someone tries to destroy your life's work, you don't just fight back, you make sure it can't happen to anyone else." I accepted Robert's offer not because I needed the money, but because it felt like the right way to use my experience. Over the next 2 years, we helped 43 family-owned businesses create employment policies that protected older workers while maintaining operational flexibility. Every policy we drafted included a version of the retirement protection clause that had saved my case. Every employee handbook we reviewed was checked for potential discrimination vulnerabilities. Every transition we managed prioritized preserving institutional knowledge rather than discarding experience. The work gave me a sense of purpose that retirement alone couldn't provide. Instead of simply enjoying my golden years, I was using them to ensure that other workers wouldn't face the discrimination I'd experienced. 3 years after Kellerman's attempt to steal my retirement, I received news that provided the final chapter to our story. David called to inform me that Kellerman had been arrested for fraud at his latest position, a small consulting firm where he'd been inflating client billings and embezzling funds. "Uncle Phil," David said, "it looks like age discrimination was just the beginning. This guy's been cutting corners and breaking rules everywhere he's worked." "I'm not surprised," I replied. "Someone who would systematically target older workers for cost savings isn't likely to have strong ethical boundaries in other areas either." The case made the Business Journal. They specifically mentioned his history of age discrimination as part of a pattern of unethical behavior. That evening, I sat on my back porch with Winston, reflecting on how justice sometimes takes time to fully unfold. Kellerman's attempt to cheat me out of my retirement had ultimately exposed a pattern of corruption that extended far beyond age discrimination. His career was over, his reputation destroyed, and his freedom in jeopardy. Meanwhile, the policies created in response to his discrimination were protecting workers across multiple industries. The contrast couldn't have been more perfect. His pursuit of short-term profits through illegal discrimination had resulted in long-term consequences that destroyed everything he tried to build. My decision to fight for justice rather than accept injustice had created lasting protections that would benefit workers for generations. As the sun set behind Susan's oak tree, I thought about the lesson this experience had taught me. Experience isn't just about knowing how things work, it's about understanding how things should work and having the wisdom to fight when they don't. Kellerman had looked at a 61-year-old warehouse manager and seen expensive dead weight. He'd missed the institutional knowledge, the policy expertise, the network of relationships, and the moral authority that comes from decades of dedicated service. Most importantly, he'd underestimated the power of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything right on his side. The best revenge, I'd learned, wasn't destroying your enemy, it was building something so strong and lasting that their attacks only made it more powerful. Every worker protected by our policies, every discrimination case won using our precedents, every company that chose fair treatment over cost-cutting was a victory that multiplied the impact of our original fight. 5 years later, I still receive thank you notes from workers whose rights were protected by policies we helped create. I still consult with David on age discrimination cases. I still serve on the Senior Advocacy Board, and I still help Robert's firm ensure that family businesses treat their employees with dignity and respect. At 66, I'm busier in retirement than I ever was while working, and I've never been happier. The $87,000 bonus that Kellerman tried to steal has grown into a legacy worth far more than money, a systematic change that protects vulnerable workers and ensures that experience is valued rather than discarded. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd simply accepted Kellerman's severance offer and walked away. I'd have missed out on my retirement bonus, but more importantly, dozens of other workers would have faced discrimination without protection. The thought reminds me why fighting back was the only acceptable choice. Not just for my own financial security, but for the principle that workers deserve dignity, respect, and fair treatment regardless of their age. Have you ever faced age discrimination in your workplace? Have you seen older employees pushed out just before retirement eligibility? How do you think companies should balance cost control with fair treatment of experienced workers? Share your thoughts in the comments below.